I invite you to take your Bibles, please, and turn to Zechariah. We finished chapter 9 and we finished chapter 10, but we're not able to finish all the details that I wanted you to be able to divide that chapter into to answer the last question. And the last question comes from the last verse in chapter 10. And we asked the question number 34. In chapter 10, describe what it means to walk up and down in his name, saith Jehovah. Verse 12 says, I will strengthen them in Jehovah, and they shall walk up and down in his name, saith Jehovah. We got to find out who the them is. We got to understand walk up and down means I'm pretty free. I can walk here and I walk there, I walk up, I walk down. But it's all in the name of Jehovah. Divide that chapter 10 into 3 sections. And you get a distinct picture of what it means to, we already know the name of Jehovah's authority, Jehovah. I'm walking in the authority of Jehovah. And these last chapters 9 following, we see judgments coming upon the enemies of God, and really a judgment that talked about of coming upon God's people, Judah, Ephraim, the Israelites. And out of that comes a remnant among God's people, that among all the peoples, but there comes a remnant. We have coming through chapters 9 following, through chapter 12, we see a progression of things that we know that are brought forth in the New Testament. We'll examine tonight. What is that goodly sum you think I am, as the shepherd prophet says? 30 pieces of silver. Cast it to the potter. Does that sound familiar to you? Well, that's what they betrayed Jesus with, yeah? He's a shepherd. You go into the chapter we'll go into, hopefully, we'll get there. We'll be able to see that they looked upon whom they pierced. Oh, that rings a bell, doesn't it? That rings a bell. John 19:37, where they looked upon whom they had pierced. So there's a sense of rejecting the shepherd and then mourning when they look upon whom has been pierced. There's a mourning, and that seems to be a progression that we see through here of God setting up his kingdom. And what should help you when you studied Revelation, and we see that after the 1,000-year reign, Satan will try to have his go at God's people again. And these last few chapters says that's right. He'll never quit until the final thing in Revelation. But he'll try to devour God's people, and God will always be there to protect his people. We'll see that in these last 3 chapters, especially 9, 10, 11. We'll see it in 12. We won't be able to finish that. But I just want you to be prepared, that be looking for, there's the nations that are talked about, and when you go against God's people, which I believe will be spiritual Israel, you will not defeat them. Though some in physical Israel is going to be just as bad as you are, nations. But there will be a part of them that are poor that will listen to me. And from that point, he'll bring forth this great people of God, that God will protect them. Even though we go through death, and it's interesting, I'll make them a pan of wood. I will make a fire pan for wood. They'll be able to bring forth fire. What is Revelation when he talks about there'll be fire from heaven to devour the enemy after the 1,000-year reign? 1,000-year reign, so that's supposed to be the end. That's Armageddon. That's the big deal. That's the whole thing. There comes something after that. That's the whole point. That when God defeats Rome, there will be other persecution upon God's people. And we live in prime for that. A time for that, when that will continue to occur. But the whole point, Zechariah gives us that image, apocalyptic literature, and John uses that type of literature to draw home what's going to be happening. But we've already been conditioned when we study the Old Testament. We're already conditioned, they're not going to win. What do we say about the book of Revelation? I know who wins in the end. Yeah, you know it from Zechariah too. That ought to increase your learning and put the bookends on what all the Bible is about. And some events are being set forth. So we're seeing things fulfilled in Christ from the New Testament point of view. We'll see that's how that relates, and we'll relate those. But who wins in the end? Study with me, Zechariah 9, 10, 11. And we'll see who wins in the end, how he describes that. So let's take this first section. I'm going to read in verse 2, teraphim, diviners, false dreams. What were teraphims? Well, they were little gods, or they're life-size gods. And we see in Genesis 31 that Rachel had a teraphim. She could hide it on her body. Must have been pretty tiny. Michael takes a teraphim and lays it out on a bed and puts some hay for the head. It looks like a body, so it could be pretty big. But they were ways in which they were little gods, where people could divine by them. And he says here, as we look in chapter 10, ask ye of Jehovah rain in the time of latter rain. Why will we do that? Because verse 17 says, for how great is his goodness, how great is his beauty. Grain shall make the young man flourish. New wine, the virgins. So there's the crops that are coming. So right into this division, he has the idea of, why don't you ask it in the name of Jehovah? One means walk up and down in the name of Jehovah, because I can supply that to you. You will have that. Why don't you ask me for it? You see? As we get into chapter 10, what does it mean to walk in up and down the name of Jehovah? That means when we turn to Jehovah, we won't have the famine that God was using to teach them to turn from idolatry. And so all of these ways of divining, the teraphim, the diviners, the false dreams, they comfort how? In vain. In vain. They make you feel good. Here's the way we ought to go. Therefore they go their way like sheep. They are afflicted because there is what? No shepherd. Oh, I got a diviner. He's telling what's in the future. I got a teraphim. He's telling me I can divine by that. Little gods. No, that's all for naught. I'm walking in the name of Jehovah. Why don't you ask me? But you're wanting to ask your idols. You're wanting to ask people of the world. You're not wanting to have me. So mine herds, verse 3, my anger is kindled against the shepherds, and I will punish the he-goats. He-goats are powerful, but I think sheep divided from the goats one day, maybe they won't be of the good side. Who are the shepherds here? And we're looking at nations that are going to rule over God's people, his sheep. And they have their way of going about things by the teraphim and diviners and false dream. There's your idolatrous nations. Remember, this is the idea of God's judgment upon the nations, the world nations. He talked about Tyre, chapter 9, verses 11 following. God's people are going to be fighting against the sons of Greece. We talked about that, the Macedonian Empire, Antiochus III, and the fourth, and all of those things that the Maccabees will have to conquer. We talked about that last week. So we sit here as he springs forth his judgment upon them. I will punish the he-goats, for Jehovah of hosts hath visited his flock. That's his people. And the nations have been treating them poorly, been treating them badly. And I will make them as his goodly horse in battle. When you read Job's account in 39 verses 19 through 25 of a war horse, you ought to read that. You'll think, wow, your eyes can just picture pawing. And when the sword is coming, he ain't backing off. That horse is going into battle. And he's going to make my little flock a war horse. They're not flinch. I'm going. Call on me. Walk in my name and appeal to me for your authority. How do you live? I will give you the grain. And you will be my goodly horse in battle. From him shall come forth the cornerstone, and from him the nail, and from him the battle bow, from him the early ruler of together. We've already seen in chapter 9 that Ephraim and Judah are the bow and the arrow for God My people will rise up against the nations, and they did that with the Maccabees and before the time of Christ. And he's just emphasizing it's going to continue that way, but shall come forth the cornerstone. So we automatically have, well, with God's people, would a cornerstone come one day? Who would that be? Same one they look upon whom they're piercing, the same one that they said, here's the price, what I think of you, shepherd Jesus. And they will learn to mourn it when they look upon whom they pierced. That's in order for us. And what we see here is that, well, a cornerstone that you can nail your life upon, that's also a powerful horse in battle. All of those things coming together, that he's the battle bow from him, every ruler together, that verse 4, from him shall come forth the cornerstone, from him the nail, from him the battle bow, from him every ruler together. That is going to be victorious over the world. And it's just a picture of God. Walk in my name. Appeal to my authority for your life. And God's people hadn't done that. That's why they went on to captivity. They come back and they're supposed to be building the temple. And he's trying to encourage them, look what's ahead of you. There's going to be a greater temple than what you're building now. It'll be greater than Solomon's. It's a spiritual temple of God that these last few chapters, I believe, are pointing to, as the Jews of Jerusalem will grow and decay and become like the world, and AD 70 they'll be destroyed. But what comes out victorious? I think that's spiritual Israel. I want us to say, is that a possibility of a good interpretation? I hope you can follow it, because it seems to be so vivid and non-contradictory and brings out every little thing that God says to apply. So you have to think in terms of spiritual Israel, spiritual people of God, the people of God that are Jews that are going to be meeting God's punishment, and at the same time God's people that's never going to be destroyed, and bringing people, all nations. It won't be just the Jews, all nations will come, as we'll see in this chapter as well. To me, that's what fits. But when you read this, it is very difficult to understand. To put that into that, say, you're fanciful thinking. Well, you read, study, but you take the text and you begin to realize how does that work? And of course, it helps me when I realize there's some passages fulfilled in the New Testament, and you put that in the context here. But here are the nations that will fight against God's people, and God's people are going to be his goodly horse in the battle, and they're a bunch of sheep. And you call them a war horse or a goodly horse? Yeah. Because why? We walk to and fro, and we do so up and down in the name of Jehovah. The battle belongs to God. And there will be a spiritual people, I hope that's who we are, that will relate to that. Verse 5, they shall be as mighty men, treading down their enemies in the mire of the streets. In the battle they shall fight. Because why? Tell me why. Jehovah is with them. I'm walking in the name of Jehovah. Jehovah is with me. I'm fighting the battles against foreign powers. And they may cut your head off in Revelation, but they didn't win. It's the spiritual part of that. And the riders on horses shall be confounded. And I will strengthen the house. All right. What were Israelites divided into? Especially in the time of going into captivity? Judah. And who's the other one that's mentioned here? Joseph. Joseph was from what tribe? Ephraim. Which Joseph was indeed, Joseph would be, Ephraim was a large family of Israel. But that became your northern kingdom. Judah became the southern kingdom. And I will bring them back, and I will have mercy upon them, and they shall be as though I had not cast them off. But you did. You sent them into Assyrian captivity, and you sent them into Babylonian captivity. Yes, I'm bringing them back, but I will bless them more than they ever had before. Why? I am Jehovah, their God. How do you walk in the name of Jehovah? I will hear them. I am Jehovah their God, and I will hear them. And they of Ephraim, that's why Joseph, we could put that together, they of Ephraim shall be like a mighty man, like a goodly horse, battle. And their hearts shall rejoice as though through wine, like victorious soldiers, drinking wine, exhilarated by the wine, and yea, their children shall see it and rejoice, and their heart shall be glad in Jehovah. God's people win in the end. And it may not be the physical win, but it's those who walk in the name of Jehovah. We understand that in the New Testament. That's what we do as spiritual people. We put His authority in our lives first. And it may not look like we're going to win, but God brings judgment upon the nations, and they will be brought to their end. So what does He do? He's like He's hissing. My Bible says hiss. Like a bee, how the bees communicate, some sound, some tinkling sound. And they hiss. And He says for them, and gather them, and I have redeemed them, and they shall increase as they have increased. So here's this section of God blessing His people. They will be victorious in battle over the enemy. But then verses 8 following, we see that indeed He will hiss for them. I will sow them among many peoples, and they shall remember me in far countries, and they shall live with their children and shall return. He sows them into far countries. He's going to bring them for far countries. We think about, they went into captivity, both Assyria and Babylonian captivity. He said, I'm bringing them forth. I bring them again out of the land of what? Did they go back into Egyptian bondage? I hope we've studied enough of these prophets to realize, no, that's symbolic of being in bondage. But what did they do when they were in bondage? Did they decrease their population? They didn't have babies like they used to. Like our culture, we're losing on the fight of nations, because our birth is going down in our nations. So you don't populate, you don't stay powerful. But that's where they increased, wasn't it? And you said that. So, but that was captivity. And I gathered them out of where? Syria. That was Babylon. That's two different times. What's it symbolizing? We've been in captivity. Whether you talk about all the people, or now you're talking about the Assyrians, which was the northern kingdom, that's Ephraim. That's the lineage of Joseph and so forth. And he says, and I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon and place them, and the place shall not be found for them. What does that mean? There won't be enough room for them. There's no room for them. Spiritual Israel will be abundant, all nations of the earth. And they will, God, He's setting forth the fact of, you're in captivity in Egypt, but that didn't keep your birth rate down. And God's people are going to multiply as they did in Egypt, and they will come back to their land, and there will be no room for them. And I will pass through the sea of affliction. Tell me, is that not symbolic language? Or is there the sea of affliction? The Sea of Galilee, and over here is the Sea of affliction. I will smite the waves in the sea, and the depths of the Nile shall dry up. Is that symbolic language? Well, certainly it is. That's why we're interpreting and seeing that. He says, and the pride of Assyria. How does the pride of Assyria have to do with Nile? Because he's talking about affliction. That's all. Not a place on the map, and we've got to get them back in Egypt, and they got to come out of Egyptian bondage. No, that's all a place. And the reason being there's no room for them is that they multiplied in Egypt. And when they were brought under the power of the nations, see, that's what we're talking, the nations, they thrive. Because why? You walk up and down in the name of Jehovah, and I will bless you. He will pass that sea of affliction, so forth. We say, well, he opened those waters for Egypt. And that's what Red Sea and so forth, it may be, but it's the pride of Assyria shall be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. They're not going to rule over you. And I will strengthen them in Jehovah, and they shall walk up and down in the name, saith Jehovah. Call on me. I will bless you. I will protect you. Listen to my authority. And I'll bring you out, because you went into captivity. And I was able to bring you out of Egypt abundantly. That didn't defeat you. And the pride of Assyria, I conquered God's people, is gone. Is gone. Because he's going to bring about, from those seeds, he's going to bring about God's people, that it'll be him that he becomes the cornerstone. And then we know that's going to be God's people, spiritual Israel. So chapter 10, I hope we can have an idea of what, why does he end up with walking in the name of Jehovah? It's not nations going to defeat you. You're not going to get your message from the teraphim. Big old horses there. That's who we appeal to for power. No, I'm going to let sheep be my goodly horse. Because it's God. It's God. What a picture. Chapter 11. We come into chapter 11 and chapter number 35. In chapter 11, what's the people's estimate of the gracious work of the prophet shepherd? Let's lead up to this passage. Here is judgment coming. Just open up what is beautiful Lebanon and all of the trees, the cedar trees. Well, O fir tree, for the cedar is fallen, because the goodly ones are destroyed. Well, O you oaks of Bashan, for the strong forest has come down. A voice of wailing of the shepherds, plural, for their glory is destroyed. Why? Because the land by which they would feed their sheep, and we're talking about the east side of the Jordan River or the west side of the Jordan River, where there was apparently a great population of lions in the day. All that's destroyed. The voice of the roaring of young lions, for the pride of Jehoram is laid waste. Thus saith Jehovah my God, feed the flock of slaughter. Zechariah, feed the flock of slaughter. Why does he open up with fire and destruction? It's because they're a people that's going to be slaughtered. And again, the enemies of the world are against God's people. And he gives us some reasons why he has a problem. And some of this problem was with his people as well. But feed the flock of slaughter, whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty, that they sell them and say, blessed be Jehovah, for I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. See, their own leaders don't pity them. And a lot of these leaders would be the rulers that are over them and this worldly empires. They don't care about them. But he says, for I will no more pity the inhabitants of the land, Jehovah, but lo, I will deliver everyone into his neighbor's hand, into the hand of his king, and they shall smite the land out of their land, and I will deliver them. So I fed the flock of slaughter. Verily the poor of the flock. And I took unto me 2 staves. Shepherds have a stave. They took one. One's beauty, and the other I called bands. And I fed the flock. 3 items that a shepherd would have with a bag and a staff and a pipe, playing music. And we're going to see that he speaks in verse 17 of the worthless shepherd. You take up the instrument of the foolish shepherd in verse 15. So what we see here is that here's Zechariah as being a good prophet and a good shepherd. And so he says, I fed the flock of slaughter. And I cut off the 3 shepherds, probably maybe these are under shepherds. Here's Zechariah, and here's shepherds that ought to be on a lower level than maybe a prophet. They don't even do their work right. They don't do it. they're cut asunder. He didn't have much patience with them. And so he takes them, 3 shepherds in 1 month. My soul was weary of them. And what? Their soul hated Zechariah. They hated me. Then said I will not feed you. That which dieth, let it die. That which is cut off, let it be cut off. Let them that are left, every one eat the flesh of another. God's people are going to turn away from me. They're going to be unprotected. They will be destroyed. And the nations who are shepherds that don't care will do that. So I took my staff beauty and cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant which I made with what? All the people of Israel? All the peoples of the land. That's your foreign nations. You will not destroy my people. But these aren't my people anymore. Just a few poor are listening to me. I will protect them. But I'll let you be at the discretion of those who are leading you in your land. And so God breaks a covenant? How come he breaks a covenant? The covenant is broken because they don't want to listen to him anymore. You'll walk in the name of Jehovah. You'll be strong, but you're going to be subject to this. So this beauty, this grace, this favor is cut asunder. And he says, and it was broken that day, and thus the poor of the flock that gave heed unto me knew that it was the word of Jehovah. They're listening to Zechariah and understand he's got the word of Jehovah. Listen to him. Only a few will. Only a few did. And we find he's breaking now. He's got something else to break too. So in the midst of this, when he says, the poor of the flock that gave heed unto me knew that it was the word of Jehovah, and I said unto them, if you think good, give me my hire, and if not, forbear. Don't give me anything. What did they give him? They weighed for my hire 30 pieces of silver. You know, there's people wanting you to buy silver right now because it's going over the top. It's going to be a big deal. You need to invest in that right now. 30 pieces of silver? Oh, maybe less than $1,000 now, but it's going to get big. What was 30 pieces of silver back in the day? What? A gorded slave. A gorded slave, Exodus 21. Wasn't just a slave. One's been gorded. He might not be too much help for you tomorrow. Got a little problem. And how ironic. I mean, does God love irony? Look what he says. When he speaks about there, here's his prophet, and here's Zechariah being that prophet. Cast it unto the potter the goodly prize that I was prized at by them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver, cast them in the potter in the house of Jehovah. Just wasteful, not worth much. He calls it a goodly price. Judas, he just wanted to get rich, you know. Really? 30 pieces of silver? He was covetous. He wanted money, that's true. But in this context, is 30 pieces of silver a big price? It's an insult to God. It's an insult. This is what you think of my shepherd? I want you to walk in the name of Jehovah. Only a small set. That's the word of God. And only a small group has that understanding. And so what happens right after that? Then I cut asunder mine other staff, bands, which I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Judah and Israel would not be a concise people of God anymore. It's going to be broken up. People are going to be coming from all sorts of different tribes. Along with the Gentiles, they're going to come to God. And there's not going to be that cohesiveness between them. I'll break it asunder. And they're going to be destroyed. And so here's God's judgment upon those leaders. What about them who led them astray and so forth? Jehovah said unto me, take unto thee yet again the instruments of the foolish shepherd. For lo, I will raise up a shepherd in the land who will not visit those that are cut off, neither will seek those that are scattered, nor heal that which is broken, nor feed that which is sound. But he will eat the flesh of the fat sheep and will tear the hoofs in pieces. Just get the last bit of flesh off those bones. It's all about feeding my hunger. That's the selfish shepherd. Woe to the worthless shepherd that leaveth the flock, not protecting them. And here's the graphic point. The sword shall be upon his arm. It's about ready to cut it off. And upon his most precious part, the right eye, which is about to be put out. His arm shall be clean, dried up, separated from the lifeblood of blood. The sword is on his arm. Cut that off. And his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Nations, that's what I'm going to do to what you've done to my people. And there were some people among them that rejected the shepherd that God would send them. What would happen to them in AD 70? One of these nations, whom God brings down, they took and destroyed and put an end to God's people, Israelites. Their temple destroyed and brought them to an end. All their lineage and stuff, a lot of the connection with being, the idea of priest and so forth. A lot of that was taken away. And God will judge his people, and he will judge those that inflict punishment upon those people. God uses nations against nations. God uses nations against his physical people, Israel. But the lesson I want us to get here from this, we see what his estimate of the gracious work of the prophet shepherd was an insult. What does God think about stewardship? We have elders in the church. What do these worthless shepherds, what do they not do? Here you have a job as a shepherd, and they will not go after them. They will not feed them. They're going to not seek after those that are scattered, nor heal that which is broken, nor feed that which is sound. Feed that which is sound. They got to remain healthy. And when I'm thinking shepherds are elders. So we speak about elders, and we see pictures in the Old Testament. When we stop and say, well, shepherd, that's a prestigious, honorary place among God's people. Yeah, it's respect. But it's a work, isn't it? And when God sees that neglect of not bringing sound food for the people, just let's get along. Or not caring about those who are going astray, not wanting to bring them back. When it gets to that point, God doesn't overlook that. Here he doesn't overlook his people that said, I don't think much of Jesus. Well, AD 70 is judgment upon you, and it happened. Because they rejected the Christ. And God brought an end to that, and that wasn't the beginning of the new covenant, as some of our brethren want to argue. But it was the end of that connection. It was, as Hebrew writers said, it's growing old, and it's going away, and it would. But God will bring his judgment upon them, and then he'll take care of the ones that did harm to his people. He'll bring the nations of the world down. That's why we see in the book of Revelation that Babylon, you want to call it that, the great harlot, call her that, is brought down. But after that happens, after 1,000 years, you got the devil trying to destroy the people yet again before the end comes. He never stops. He never gives up until he's thrown in the lake of fire, and that's the end. So we got to be victorious through the judgments that come upon us. I know we have a short time. Any questions on that? Maybe chapters 12 through 14 are going to be pretty long. We'll do that. But notice in chapter 12, let's just look at kind of the burden of the word Jehovah concerning Israel. Thus saith Jehovah. What do we see there? He stretched forth the heavens. Are we look at him as creator? Because I think that's what Zechariah wants to say. He stretches forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth, this is what I like, formeth the spirit of man within him. That inward, invisible man is so important. God formed it within us. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of reeling unto all the people, not Jerusalem, not Israelites, to all the peoples. That's the nations. Why would it be a cup of reeling? And the word there may get even bigger than, I just like a cup of gumbo, please, not a bowl. This is a bowl. This is a bowl of wine, abundance of wine that gets people intoxicated. God's people are going to be that to the people of the nations? Yeah. There's a context for that. And he says, a cup of reeling of all the peoples round about, and upon Judah also shall be in the siege against Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in that day, and notice in that day, verse 3, verse 4 through 6, verse 8, verse 9. And we talk about in that day, there's a day of judgment coming. And it will happen. I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all the peoples. All that burden themselves with it shall be sore wounded, and all the nations of the earth shall be gathered together against it. In that day, said Jehovah, I will smite every horse with terror, his rider with madness, and will open mine eyes upon the house of Judah. That means I'm going to look over to protect them, and I will smite every horse of the peoples, there's your nations, with blindness. Blindness, terror, madness. Deuteronomy 28:28, that's what God says I'll do to my people. He'll bring the judgment that he brings upon the people, he brings upon the nations. What he brings upon the nations, he brings it upon physical Israel. And he will do that. But here's that bowl of wine, or a cup of wine, it causes intoxication. And they will be intoxicated, and here, as if a big old stone, you push against that stone, you will be wounded. You will be punished for hurting my people. And they will be the source of you being intoxicated with madness. You will not defeat them, and you will wound yourself sore because you touched them. And that's what we're seeing here in this passage. Now look at verse 5. The chieftains of Judah shall say in their heart, the inhabitants of Jerusalem are my strength, in Jehovah of hosts their God. The leaders will look upon the people who are walking in the name of Jehovah. They will indeed be the people that give the leader strength. Now people are going to be strong from the group to the leaders. The chieftains are going to realize Jehovah is strengthening me because he strengthened my people. In that day I will make the chieftains of Judah like a pan of fire among wood, and like a flaming torch among sheaves. And they shall devour all the peoples round about on the right hand and on the left, and that of Jerusalem shall yet again dwell in their own place, even in Jerusalem. God's people will not be destroyed. They won't be in physical Jerusalem, but as we see from the New Testament, it will be heavenly Jerusalem. And Zechariah is painting that picture. And no wonder John takes apocalyptic literature and uses this concept that Zechariah had, that was the image that's set forth, that indeed this was being promised. Now look at the blessings. Verse 7 says, Jehovah also will save the tents of Judah first, and the glory of the house of David, and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem be not magnified above Judah. In that day shall Jehovah defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them, that day shall be as David. How strong was David? He took care of Goliath, didn't he? And the house of David shall be as God, as the angel of Jehovah before them. There's the power. David didn't have that power. He sinned. The angel of Jehovah is before them. And it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. He'll bring them to an end. As I know our time has to stop, but notice in verse 10, I will pour upon the house of David, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace, supplication. They shall look unto me, and they that they have pierced shall mourn for him, as one mourneth for his only son. There will be a time when they will be saddened that they show disrespect to the Good Shepherd in the last chapter. And that would happen, wouldn't it? Revelation 1, there's a mourning as they look to the one whom they pierced. As God's people will look back at that. And John 19:37 is a factor of mourning over one who they've pierced. And of course, piercing, we'll talk about that. That's not because somebody died. Jesus was already dead when they pierced him. It was a coup de grace. We're going to make sure he's dead. Disrespect for the one they put on the cross. And who's the one that saves us? It's the one that people didn't want to listen to him and said, 30 pieces of silver, but all you worth to me. And Jesus is worth a whole world to us. I hope we'll never forget that. Thank you.